Hello, and welcome to Nightly History. Tonight, we will travel together into the heart of Southeast Asia. Imagine yourself stepping quietly into a jungle at dusk. The air is heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth. Cicadas sing a constant drowsy chorus, and above you, the canopy stretches like a vaulted ceiling of green. As you walk, you notice stones beneath the roots, massive blocks half buried, carved with faded images of gods and kings. The deeper you go, the more the forest parts to reveal something extraordinary. Towers that look like lotus buds rising into the sky, walls covered in intricate bas-reliefs, corridors that seem endless, and faces of stone gazing serenely into eternity. This is Angkor. Once, it was not a ruin swallowed by the jungle, but a thriving city, the capital of a mighty empire, home to hundreds of thousands of people. For centuries, Angkor was one of the largest cities on Earth, a metropolis of water and stone that dazzled merchants, pilgrims, and emissaries from distant lands. Its kings commanded armies, built temples that rivaled the wonders of Egypt and Rome, and engineered a landscape that harnessed rivers and monsoon rains to feed millions. And yet, all of it, the temples, the palaces, the great reservoirs, would one day be abandoned. The jungle crept in, root by root, until only the silent stones remained. Travellers from later centuries could hardly believe that such a city had ever existed at all. It was a forgotten empire, remembered only in fragments of legend, until rediscovery centuries later. Tonight, as the world around you grows quiet, let us walk back in time together. Let us explore how Angkor was born, how it rose into brilliance, how it fell, and how the jungle took over what was once the beating heart of a civilization. So, settle in, let the noise of your day fade, let the rhythm of history carry you slowly, gently into another world. Long before Angkor Wat's towers pierced the horizon, before the faces of Bayon gazed across the jungle, the Khmer people were carving their destiny into the fertile plains of the Mekong Basin. The story begins in the 9th century, in a time when Southeast Asia was a patchwork of small kingdoms, each rising and falling with the rhythm of the monsoon rains. The land that would become Angkor was both a gift and a challenge. To the west lay great lakes and rivers. To the east, the dense forests of what is now Vietnam. To the north, the mountains that formed a natural barrier. The soil was rich, dark, and generous, but it was also unpredictable. Torrential rains came with the monsoon, flooding the plains. In the dry season, the earth cracked and water seemed to vanish. To survive here required not only resilience, but ingenuity. It was in this setting that a figure emerged, Jayavarman II. In the year 802 AD, on a sacred mountain called Phnom Kulen, he performed a ritual that would shape Khmer identity for centuries. Surrounded by priests, incense, and the rhythmic chanting of mantras, he declared himself Devaraja, the God King. It was more than politics. It was a spiritual act, proclaiming that the ruler was not just a king, but a divine being, chosen to link heaven and earth. The ritual was both symbolic and practical. It united a scattered land under a single vision. For the Khmer people, their king was not just a man of flesh and blood. He was a cosmic figure, the earthly embodiment of Shiva, Vishnu, or later, the Buddha. Every temple, every reservoir, every city that would follow was built upon this sacred foundation. Jayavarman II's successors continued this legacy. They were warrior kings and master builders, extending Khmer influence across Southeast Asia. They founded the first settlements in the region of Angkor, drawn by the proximity of the Tonle Sap Lake, a body of water whose seasonal flooding created one of the most fertile environments on Earth. The lake expanded and contracted with the rhythm of the year, swelling in the monsoon, shrinking in the dry season, creating cycles of abundance that could feed vast populations. To harness this power, the Khmer kings began building baray, vast reservoirs, rectangular lakes dug with monumental precision. These were not mere ponds but artificial seas stretching for miles. They captured the floodwaters of the monsoon and stored them for the dry months, creating a steady supply of life-giving water for rice cultivation. With water came food, with food came people, and with people came power. Imagine standing on the edge of one of these reservoirs at sunset, the water reflecting the sky like a mirror, while in the distance, farmers bent low in the fields, their outlines glowing gold in the fading light. This was the foundation of Angkor, not just temples and kings, but an entire landscape transformed into a living machine, designed to keep the empire alive through the cycles of nature. The early Angkorian temples were modest compared to the grandeur to come, but they carried deep symbolic weight. Built of sandstone and laterite, they rose like miniature mountains, each one a microcosm of the universe, with the central tower representing Mount Meru, the sacred peak at the center of Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. Around them, villages grew, roads stretched out, and canals linked settlements to fields and reservoirs. The Khmer were building not just a city, but an entire world in stone and water. And so, from fear of scarcity and faith in divine kingship, Angkor was born. What had begun as a sacred declaration on a mountaintop became the seed of an empire. The Khmer rulers understood that power was not just measured in armies, but in the ability to control nature itself. They learned to tame the water, to carve mountains into temples, to merge the divine and the earthly in a single vision. This was the beginning of a civilization unlike any other, one that would soon astonish the medieval world with its scale, its beauty, and its spiritual ambition. By the 10th century, the Khmer kings had turned their gaze fully to Angkor. The forests around the Tonle Sap were cleared, the Baray expanded, and a city of unparalleled ambition began to rise. Imagine walking through it, not as a tourist centuries later, but as a traveller in its prime, a place alive with the sounds of chanting monks, the clatter of ox carts, and the murmur of flowing water carried through canals. At its heart stood the temples, not mere shrines, but vast symbolic landscapes carved from sandstone. The Khmer believed their city was more than a collection of streets and houses. It was a reflection of the cosmos itself, ordered and harmonious, a physical map of the divine world. To step into Angkor was to step into a carefully crafted vision of heaven on earth. The great temple mountains rose above the plains, their towers shaped like lotus buds, each one representing Mount Meru, the cosmic peak at the center of Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. Surrounding them, moats shimmered in the sun, vast rectangular seas representing the cosmic oceans. From above, the entire complex looked like a mandala, a sacred diagram of the universe, rendered in stone and water. But Angkor was not only about religion, it was a living city. Roads radiated outward, lined with causeways and bridges decorated with stone guardians. Villages stretched in every direction, their houses built of wood and bamboo on stilts to withstand the changing waters, the scent of rice paddies mixed with smoke from cooking fires, while merchants sold fruits, pottery, and textiles in bustling markets. And always, everywhere, there was water. The Khmer genius lay not only in their temples but in their ability to engineer the land itself. Their reservoirs, the East Baray, the West Baray, were so vast that they appeared like inland seas. The West Baray alone stretched nearly 5 miles long and more than a mile wide, its surface glistening beneath the tropical sun. These Baray, connected by an intricate web of canals, turned the uncertain rhythm of the monsoon into a steady heartbeat of abundance. They allowed for multiple rice harvests each year, sustaining populations far larger than most cities in medieval Europe. Imagine standing on the dike of the West Baray at dawn. Mist rises from the water, the cries of birds echo across the surface, and far in the distance, a temple spire catches the first light of the sun. Farmers already move in the fields, their feet submerged in shallow water as they plant seedlings in neat, endless rows. This was the daily rhythm of Angkor, a balance between human effort and the gifts of the land. It was this balance that allowed the Khmer kings to dream bigger than any before them. In the early 12th century, under the reign of Suryavarman II, Angkor reached a new pinnacle. His ambition was to build a temple that would not only honour the gods, but also proclaim his own divine authority for eternity. The result was Angkor Wat, the largest religious monument ever constructed by human hands. Angkor Wat was not built in haste. Its construction took decades, employing thousands of artisans, labourers and priests. The stone was quarried miles away and transported along canals and rivers to the site. Each block was cut with extraordinary precision, fitted so tightly that the seams are almost invisible. Step inside its galleries, and you are surrounded by miles of bas-reliefs. Soldiers march in endless processions, celestial dancers whirl in frozen elegance, and epic battles from the Mahabharata and Ramayana unfold across the walls. The carvings are so detailed that even today, centuries of erosion have not erased the delicate jewellery, the graceful smiles, the curling flames of battle. But Angkor Wat was more than a monument. It was a cosmic statement. Its 5 towers symbolised the peaks of Mount Meru. Its surrounding moat represented the cosmic ocean. As the sun rose behind its central tower, light spilled across the causeway, illuminating the temple in a golden glow. Pilgrims walking toward it felt as though they were approaching not a building, but the very heart of the universe. Even in its time, Angkor Wat was an astonishment. Travellers from China, India, and beyond wrote of its grandeur. For the Khmer people, it was the centre of their world, the proof that their kings were more than rulers. They were conduits of divine power. Yet, Angkor's greatness did not end with Angkor Wat. In the late 12th century, another king, Jayavarman VII, rose to power. His reign marked a transformation, not only in religion, but in the very spirit of the city. He was a devout Buddhist, and under his guidance, Angkor became a place of compassion and monumental expression. Jayavarman VII built Angkor Thom, the great city, a walled capital enclosed by massive gates and towers. At its centre stood the Bayon, a temple unlike any other. From its many towers gazed hundreds of colossal stone faces, serene and smiling, each one radiating calm, as if blessing the city below. These faces were not simply artistic decoration. They embodied the king himself, merged with the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, a symbol of infinite compassion. To walk among them was to feel watched over by a benevolent presence, larger than life, eternal. The scale of Jayavarman's vision was immense. He built hospitals, rest houses for travellers, and countless other temples across his empire. Roads extended like arteries, lined with statues of gods and demons, pulling the serpent Vasuki in a grand cosmic tug-of-war. Every causeway, every gate, every carving told a story, weaving religion, myth, and kingship into the fabric of daily life. By this time, Angkor was one of the largest cities in the world. At its height, scholars estimate it may have housed between 700,000 and 1 million people. To put that in perspective, London in the 12th century held perhaps 30,000. Angkor was a metropolis of staggering proportions, a city of water and stone that dwarfed almost every other urban centre on Earth. Its markets bustled with goods from across Asia. Ivory, ceramics, spices, and silks passed through its streets. Monks copied manuscripts, musicians played flutes and drums, dancers performed in the courtyards of temples. The city was alive with both grandeur and the hum of daily life, a place where cosmic symbolism met the ordinary tasks of living. And yet, despite its size, Angkor was not a city of noise and chaos. Its design reflected harmony. The reservoirs mirrored the sky, the temples echoed the mountains, the moats reflected the stars. At night, when the air cooled and torches flickered along the causeways, the reflection of the temples shimmered in the water, as though heaven itself had descended to earth. Imagine lying beside one of the great moats at midnight, the chorus of frogs echoing, the silhouette of towers rising against the stars. This was Angkor at its height, a city where every stone, every drop of water, every ritual was part of a cosmic whole. It is hard for us, centuries later, to grasp the scale of what the Khmer built. But in their time, Angkor was not merely a city, it was a universe. Its kings were gods, its temples were mountains, its waterworks were veins of life. To live there was to inhabit a vision, to walk daily through a sacred landscape where the divine and the earthly were inseparable. This was the Angkor Ascendant, the city of water and stone. It was a city designed not only to sustain life, but to embody eternity itself. But as with all great civilizations, even in its golden age, shadows were already forming at the edges. The reservoirs that fed its people were fragile, dependent on cycles of rain that could not always be controlled. The constant building, the endless expansion, placed heavy burdens on both land and labour, and beyond its borders, rivals watched and waited. For now, though, Angkor stood unrivaled, a shining jewel of the medieval world, a city that seemed as eternal as the cosmos it mirrored. By the 12th century, Angkor had become more than just a capital. It was the beating heart of an empire that stretched across much of mainland Southeast Asia. Its kings commanded armies, levied tribute from distant lands, and raised monuments that seemed to defy time itself. This was the golden age of the Khmer rulers, a period when power, religion, and ambition fused into creations so vast that they still astonish the world today. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the skyline of Angkor in this era. To the east, the colossal outline of Angkor Wat gleams as the rising sun sets its sandstone towers aflame in gold. To the north, the walled city of Angkor Thom sprawls across the landscape, its monumental gates lined with gods and demons locked in their cosmic tug-of-war. And above it all, the serene faces of the Bayon gaze outward, watching over the people with a calm, eternal smile. This was not just architecture. It was a declaration of divine authority carved into the very earth. The Golden Age is inseparable from the reign of Suryavarman II, who ruled in the early 12th century. His ambition was boundless. Like his predecessors, he understood that to rule as a Devaraja, a god king, one needed to make that divinity visible in stone. His vision was Angkor Wat. To understand Angkor Wat is to understand Suryavarman's dream. The temple is enormous, covering more than 500 acres, its moat wider than a river, its central towers rising more than 200 feet above the earth. Built to honor Vishnu, the preserver god of Hindu belief, it was both a temple and a mausoleum, a sanctuary of worship and a monument to the king's eternal soul. Construction required tens of thousands of workers, artisans, labourers, priests, and soldiers. Sandstone was quarried from the Kulin Mountains, more than 20 miles away, each block dragged by elephant and rafted down canals to the city. Once at the site, the stones were lifted into place without mortar, shaped so precisely that even centuries later they hold together, as though fused by some hidden force. Imagine the sound of that labour, the rasp of chisels against stone, the chant of men pulling ropes in unison, the heavy tread of elephants dragging blocks across wooden rollers, the air filled with dust and sweat, yet above the noise rose the rhythmic recitation of prayers, for this was sacred work. Each block was more than a stone. It was a fragment of the universe being assembled. The result was breathtaking. Angkor Wat's galleries stretch for miles, their walls carved with bas-reliefs that tell stories both cosmic and earthly. Marching soldiers, celestial dancers, demons and gods locked in combat, every surface is alive with movement. One panel depicts the churning of the ocean of milk, a Hindu creation myth in which gods and demons twist the serpent Vasuki to churn the cosmic sea and release the nectar of immortality. Standing before it, one feels not just a tale being told, but a universe unfolding. At sunrise, when the temple glowed with golden light, pilgrims approached along its grand causeway. Crossing the moat was not just entering a building, it was leaving the ordinary world and stepping into a cosmic realm. For Suryavarman, the second Angkor Wat was his immortality. It proclaimed to his people and to the gods themselves that he was a ruler whose vision reached beyond time. Yet the Golden Age was not built by one man alone. After Suryavarman II, another figure rose who would reshape Angkor in his own image, Jayavarman VII, who reigned at the end of the 12th century. Where Suryavarman had looked to Vishnu, Jayavarman turned to the Buddha. He was a devout Mahayana Buddhist, and under his rule, Angkor became a city of compassion, healing, and monumental expression. His capital was Angkor Thom, the great city. Enclosed by massive walls and moats, it was entered through gates lined with colossal stone figures. On one side, gods strained at the coils of the serpent Vasuki. On the other, demons pulled in opposition. To walk across the causeway was to cross the cosmic struggle between good and evil, stepping into a city that was itself a sacred mandala. At the centre of Angkor Thom rose the Bayon, Jayavarman's masterpiece. Unlike Angkor Wat's soaring towers, the Bayon was intimate and mysterious, its corridors winding, its towers sprouting faces that gazed outward in every direction. There are more than 200 of them, each serene, smiling faintly, their eyes half closed in meditation. Scholars debate whether these faces are those of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, embodying compassion, or whether they are portraits of the king himself, merged with divine presence. Perhaps they are both, human and divine, ruler and saint, inseparable. Imagine standing in the Bayon at dawn, the jungle mist curling between its towers. Everywhere you turn, a face meets your gaze, calm, benevolent, unchanging. It is as though the king himself is watching over you, blessing his city, ensuring that in his reign harmony would prevail. Jayavarman's vision extended beyond temples. He built hospitals, more than 100 of them, across his empire. He established rest houses along the roads, places where travelers and pilgrims could find shelter. His inscriptions speak not of conquest alone, but of care for his people, declaring that the suffering of the people is my suffering. In an age when kings often gloried only in war, this was a striking declaration of compassion. For the ordinary people of Angkor, the Golden Age meant more than temples. It meant a city alive with energy. Farmers worked the fields in rhythms shaped by the reservoirs. Merchants carried goods along canals, rice, fish, ceramics, spices, feeding both the city and distant markets. Artisans carved stone and cast bronze, their skills honed by generations. Dancers trained in royal courts, performing for ceremonies with gestures as precise as written words. At night, the city glowed with torchlight. Monks in saffron robes walked silently between shrines. Musicians played flutes and drums, whose echoes mingled with the chirping of insects. Children slept in stilted wooden houses, while above them, the silhouette of temples rose dark against a field of stars. Life in Angkor was at once ordinary and extraordinary, grounded in the tasks of survival, yet surrounded by the symbols of cosmic order. From distant lands, visitors marvelled. Chinese envoys wrote of the magnificence of Angkor, describing markets overflowing with goods, armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands, and temples whose size and beauty seemed almost beyond comprehension. For them, it was proof that the Khmer Empire stood among the great civilizations of the world. What makes this golden age remarkable is not only its wealth or its armies, but its vision. The Khmer kings did not build small, they built for eternity. Every reservoir was a sea, every temple a mountain, every city a cosmos. Their ambition was not only to rule, but to inscribe their place in the order of the universe. And yet beneath this glory lay fragility. The very waterworks that fed the city were vulnerable to drought. The endless labour required to build and maintain temples strained the people. Wars at the borders drained resources. Even as Angkor glowed at its brightest, shadows lengthened at its edges. But for those who lived within its walls, the Golden Age felt unshakable. To walk its causeways was to believe that the Khmer kings had indeed bound heaven and earth together. The smiles of the Bayan faces seemed eternal. The towers of Angkor Wat seemed immovable. The reservoirs stretched to the horizon like seas that could never dry. It was a city that felt as though it would last forever. And so, in the 12th and 13th centuries, Angkor stood at its zenith, a golden city of water and stone, a cosmos carved into the earth. It was a wonder of its age, and even now, centuries later, it remains one of the greatest achievements of human imagination and devotion. But history moves in cycles. Just as rivers rise and fall, so too do empires. In the centuries to come, Angkor's brilliance would face trials it could not withstand. Climate, war, and shifting faith would all take their toll. The Golden Age was not eternal, yet the legacy of its kings endures, carved into the silent stones that still rise above the jungle. For centuries, the Khmer Empire seemed unshakable. Its reservoirs glittered like inland seas, its temples rose like mountains of stone, and its kings ruled as godlike figures whose power was felt across Southeast Asia. To the people who walked its causeways and tilled its fields, Angkor must have seemed eternal, as fixed in the order of the world as the stars above. Yet beneath the grandeur, cracks had begun to spread, subtle at first, then widening with each passing generation. No empire is immune to time, and Angkor, for all its brilliance, was no exception. The first cracks appeared in the land itself. The Khmer had built their civilization on water, mastering the floods of the Tonle Sap with vast barrays and canals. For centuries, this system had transformed the uncertainty of the monsoon into abundance. But water is never fully tamed. Droughts came, sometimes lasting years. When the rains failed, reservoirs shrank, and canals dried to muddy scars across the earth. Farmers who once harvested rice 3 times a year found their fields cracked and barren. At other times, floods overwhelmed the system, breaching embankments, drowning villages, and silting the canals with mud. The balance that had sustained Angkor for centuries was fragile, and as the climate shifted, that balance began to falter. The people who laboured in the fields must have felt it first. Families who once brought in baskets of rice now watched their stores dwindle. Irrigation ditches that once flowed smoothly, clogged with weeds and sediment. Repairing them required endless labour, but the demands of kings for new temples, new roads, and new monuments never ceased. To live in Angkor was to live in the shadow of greatness, but also under its weight. For every stone tower that rose toward the sky, thousands of hands were needed to carve, haul, and place the blocks. For every new beret that glistened in the sun, countless backs bent beneath the burden of construction. The magnificence of Angkor was sustained by the toil of its people, and as harvests faltered, that toil grew heavier. The second crack came from within the faith of the kingdom itself. Religion in Angkor was never static. Early kings had looked to Shiva and Vishnu, building temples that enshrined Hindu cosmology. Later, rulers like Jayavarman VII embraced Mahayana Buddhism, filling Angkor with images of compassion, bodhisattvas, and the serene faces of the Bayon. After his reign, however, the pendulum swung again. Hinduism reasserted itself. Then Theravada Buddhism began to spread, brought by monks from Sri Lanka. The shift was not violent at first, but it was profound. Theravada Buddhism rejected the divine kingship of the Devaraja, teaching instead that all souls could seek enlightenment. For rulers whose power was built on the idea of godlike authority, this was a subtle but dangerous challenge. The old order of cosmic kingship began to lose its hold, not through rebellion, but through a quiet change in belief. Imagine walking through the Bayon in these centuries. Once, its corridors had been filled with monks chanting Mahayana sutras, incense curling upward toward the stone faces. Now the chants were softer, simpler, carried by wandering Theravada monks in plain saffron robes. They asked not for grand temples or vast donations, but for rice, shelter, and small acts of merit. The shift may have seemed minor, but it reflected a deeper change. The people no longer saw their kings as cosmic beings binding heaven and earth. They saw them as rulers, powerful still, but mortal, fallible, subject to the same impermanence that Buddhism taught governs all things. While faith shifted at home, dangers gathered at the borders. The Khmer had long clashed with their neighbours, the Cham to the east, the Dai Viet further north, and above all, the growing power of Siam to the west. In the 11th century, Angkor had crushed the Cham in war, but the scars lingered. In 1177, the Cham launched a devastating surprise attack, sailing up the Mekong in fleets of war canoes. They stormed Angkor itself, burning the city and toppling its monuments. For a moment, it seemed the empire might end then and there. But Jayavarman VII rose from the ashes, driving the charm out and rebuilding the city in a blaze of new construction. His triumph restored Khmer pride, but the memory of invasion lingered. It was proof that Angkor was not invulnerable. In the west, the rise of the Thai kingdoms changed the balance of power. By the 13th and 14th centuries, Ayutthaya had grown into a formidable state, ambitious and aggressive. Siamese armies clashed with the Khmer again and again, testing Angkor's strength. Each war drained the empire, not only in men and treasure, but in spirit. Victories grew harder to win, defeats more costly to endure. Angkor was still magnificent, but it was no longer untouchable. Its rivals sensed weakness, and in time they would press harder. Meanwhile, within Angkor, the demands of its kings strained the very people who sustained it. Each ruler sought to leave his mark, a new temple, a new beret, a new monument greater than the last. For generations, the people had laboured willingly, believing their work connected them to the gods, their sweat an offering to the cosmic order. But as faith shifted and harvests faltered, the burden grew heavier. One can imagine farmers and artisans asking, perhaps quietly at first, why build another tower when our rice fails? Why carve another god when our children hunger? The old bargain between king and people, labour for divine protection, began to fray. Visitors from afar noticed the signs. A Chinese envoy named Zhou Daguan travelled to Angkor at the end of the 13th century. His account, one of the few detailed descriptions from that time, paints a picture both wondrous and telling. He described a city of grand avenues, stone bridges, and bustling markets. He marvelled at the magnificence of Angkor Wat and the sheer size of the city. Yet he also noted that the houses of ordinary people were made of wood, fragile and temporary, while only the temples endured in stone. He observed the rigid hierarchy, the lavish ceremonies of the elite, and the struggles of commoners who toiled beneath them. His words hint at a society dazzling in appearance, but already strained beneath the surface. Imagine walking through Angkor in those years. The temples still gleamed, their carvings sharp, their moats filled with water. The causeways bustled with merchants, ox carts and pilgrims. Yet in the markets, whispers spread, of taxes too heavy, of harvests too thin, of wars too frequent. At night the torches flickered, but the faces carved in stone seemed to watch with a deeper sadness. The empire was not yet fallen, but the seeds of decline had been sown. Even the jungle, patient and relentless, waited at the edges. In abandoned corners of the city, where canals clogged and fields lay fallow, saplings sprouted, roots crept into cracks in forgotten shrines. Birds nested in silent towers, where once monks had prayed. Nature had not been banished. It had only been held at bay, and as the empire faltered, the forest prepared to reclaim what had once been its own. The cracks in Angkor's empire were not sudden catastrophes. They were slow, quiet shifts, in water, in faith, in labour, in war. Each alone might have been endured. Together, they weakened the foundation of greatness. For those who lived through it, the change may have been almost invisible. The city was still immense, the temple still radiant, the kings still powerful. But history often moves like water, eroding stone grain by grain until even mountains fall. The Khmer did not yet know it, but the age of Angkor's glory was beginning to wane. The story of Angkor's decline is not a tale of a single battle or a sudden catastrophe. Like the slow retreat of a tide, it unfolded over generations, until what had once been vast and shining was left scattered and quiet. For centuries, Angkor had been the centre of a universe. Its reservoirs, the veins of life, its temples, the dwelling places of gods, its kings, the bridges between heaven and earth. But by the 14th and 15th centuries, the harmony that sustained this world had begun to unravel. What followed was not just the fading of a city, but the slow surrender of an empire to time, to nature, and to the forces of history beyond its control. Imagine standing on the causeway to Angkor Wat in those final centuries. The towers still rose, their lotus-shaped peaks reaching skyward. The moats still shimmered in the light, wide and serene. From a distance, the city still looked eternal. But as you drew closer, you might notice the cracks. Some carvings were worn and broken. Canals once flowing with water had turned to dry trenches or stagnant pools. Reservoirs that had glistened like seas now stood shallow, their embankments crumbling. Where once there had been fields heavy with rice, patches lay barren. The grandeur was still there, but its strength was fading. The climate played its part. Scholars who have studied the sediments of Angkor's reservoirs have found evidence of extremes, decades of drought followed by years of heavy floods. In times of drought, the canals and barre could not supply enough water. Rice harvests shrank and hunger spread. Then came floods so fierce they washed away dikes, filled canals with sand, and left farmland ruined. The delicate balance between human engineering and the cycles of nature was broken. No matter how vast their reservoirs, the Khmer could not command the sky. The same water that had made Angkor great now betrayed it. As the land faltered, the borders grew restless. To the west, the Siamese kingdom of Ayutthaya rose with growing strength. Unlike the Khmer, the Siamese were aggressive and expanding, their armies disciplined and eager for conquest. Beginning in the 14th century, they launched repeated raids into Khmer territory. Angkor, once the aggressor, found itself increasingly on the defensive. Each incursion drained resources and morale. Villages were burned, captives taken, tribute demanded. Even when Angkor fought back, it was costly. The empire no longer had the inexhaustible strength it once commanded. The great walls of Angkor Thom, the gates with their lines of gods and demons, stood ready, but their guardians were stone, not flesh. Human defenders were fewer, weary and stretched thin. To the ordinary people, war was not glory, but fear. Fear of invasion, fear of conscription, fear of losing the little they had left. Armies marching across fields meant rice left unharvested, homes left unguarded, children left behind. The strain of war pressed upon a society already weakened by hunger and doubt. Inside the empire, unity began to fracture. Kings rose and fell, some strong, others weak, each demanding monuments, armies or tribute that the people could no longer easily give. The divine authority of the Devaraja no longer inspired unquestioning devotion. With Theravada Buddhism spreading, the idea that a king was a living god seemed less convincing. The faces of the Bayons still smiled serenely, but the people who looked upon them may have felt differently. The bond between ruler and ruled was loosening, and without it, the vast machinery of empire began to slow. In the villages around Angkor, life carried on in small ways. Farmers still planted rice where they could. Fishermen still cast their nets in the Tonle Sap. Monks still chanted in monasteries, and artisans still carved wood and stone. But the sense of being part of something eternal had dimmed. People no longer built for eternity. They built for survival. Wooden houses, fragile and temporary, replaced the great works of stone. The empire that had once aimed to mirror the cosmos now struggled simply to endure the seasons. And all the while, the jungle waited. At first it crept into the neglected corners. A shrine no longer tended, a canal left unrepaired, a field abandoned after a flood. Roots pressed into cracks in the stone, slowly prying them apart. Vines crept over walls, softening sharp lines, covering carvings of gods and dancers. Birds nested where kings once prayed. The forest moved slowly, silently, but relentlessly. It needed no armies, no decrees, no tribute. It only needed time. By the 15th century, the strain became too much. In 1431, Siamese forces from Ayutthaya besieged Angkor. Accounts tell of the city being captured, its treasures looted, its people scattered. Though Angkor was not obliterated in a single night, the blow was decisive. The Khmer court eventually shifted south, establishing new capitals closer to the Mekong and the coast. Angkor was not formally abandoned all at once, but its role as the heart of an empire had ended. Imagine the silence after that departure, the causeways that once carried endless streams of pilgrims and soldiers grew empty. The markets that once bustled with merchants from across Asia stood quiet. The sound of chisels carving stone ceased. The temples remained, but their priests were few. The moats and barrets reflected only the sky, not the movement of boats or the laughter of children. The city that had once housed perhaps 1 million souls became a place of echoes. For centuries, Angkor lay in that silence, remembered only by the people who lived nearby, their stories mixing memory and myth. To the outside world, it was forgotten. Travellers spoke of ruins swallowed by the jungle, of towers wrapped in roots, of faces of stone gazing out from the trees. The empire that had once seemed eternal had dissolved into shadows and whispers, its stones left to the forest, its history fading into legend. And yet, even in decline, there was dignity. The temples stood, weathered but unbroken. The carvings still told their stories, though softened by centuries of rain. The faces of the Bayon still smiled, their serenity untouched by war or time. Angkor had fallen, but it had not vanished. It remained, waiting in the jungle, a testament to the greatness and fragility of human ambition. Close your eyes and imagine yourself walking there, centuries after the fall. The air is thick with the scent of moss and damp earth. Sunlight filters through the canopy in narrow beams, illuminating patches of stone. You step over roots as thick as your arm, climbing over walls split apart by trees. Around you, silence reigns, broken only by the call of birds and the rustle of leaves. And then, through the shadows, you see it, a tower rising above the jungle, carved with a face that smiles at you, calm and eternal. It is as if the city itself still breathes, asleep beneath the forest, dreaming of the days when it was the centre of the world. The fall of Angkor was not the end of its story, it was a transformation. From empire to memory, from bustling city to quiet ruin, from human hands to nature's embrace. Its people moved on, its kings faded into history, but the stones remained, whispering their tales to anyone willing to listen. And in that whisper, Angkor endures, not as a forgotten empire, but as a reminder that even the greatest of human creations must one day yield to time. For centuries after its decline, Angkor lay hidden beneath the forest canopy, wrapped in vines and silence. Its temples still stood, weathered by rain and sun, but few outside Cambodia remembered that such a place had ever existed. Travellers from nearby villages passed along legends of stone towers swallowed by trees, of ancient kings whose faces still gazed from moss-covered walls, of a city once blessed by gods and abandoned to spirits. To the wider world, Angkor was not history. It was a rumour, a forgotten dream. Imagine approaching it in those centuries of silence. The paths to the city were no longer causeways bustling with pilgrims, but narrow trails through dense jungle. The sound of insects filled the air. The ground was soft with fallen leaves. And then suddenly, a wall of stone rose before you, its carvings half hidden under the grip of roots. The faces of the Bayan peered out from behind curtains of vines, their smiles unchanged. The towers of Angkor Wat rose above the trees, their outlines blurred by distance and haze. For those who stumbled upon it, the city must have seemed less like a ruin and more like a vision, a reminder that the forest, however vast, could not fully erase the hand of man. It was not until the 19th century that Angkor re-entered the consciousness of the world beyond Cambodia. European explorers, driven by curiosity and the hunger for discovery, heard whispers of a vast city, of stone lost in the jungle. Among them was Henri Mouhot, a French naturalist who travelled through Cambodia in the 1860s. When he came upon Angkor Wat, he was astonished. He wrote of a city rivaling the greatest monuments of Greece and Rome, a place whose scale and artistry seemed almost beyond belief. His writings spread quickly in Europe, fueling fascination with the lost city of Angkor. Though Mouhot was not truly the first outsider to see Angkor, his words carried weight. They captured the imagination of readers who had never set foot in Asia, readers eager for tales of hidden civilizations. In their eyes, Angkor became a symbol of mystery, a forgotten empire rediscovered. The truth, of course, was more complex. Angkor had never been forgotten by the Khmer themselves. Local people had lived in and around the temples for generations, caring for shrines, telling stories of their ancestors, making offerings to the gods. What the West discovered was not a secret city, but a civilization that had always remained alive in Cambodian memory. Still, the rediscovery brought change. Scholars, archaeologists, and colonial officials arrived, eager to study and to claim the ruins. They measured temples, copied inscriptions, mapped canals. They marveled at the scale of the reservoirs and the precision of the carvings. Yet their gaze was often coloured by their own era. To them, Angkor seemed a fallen wonder, a puzzle of history. They asked how such a city could have been built and why it had been abandoned. Their answers were incomplete, but their fascination ensured that Angkor would never again slip fully into obscurity. Picture the scene in those early days of study. The jungle was still thick, roots winding over walls, trees sprouting from towers. Archaeologists set up camps nearby, their lanterns flickering at night as they worked by torchlight. Local guides led them through narrow trails, pointing out hidden temples buried deep in the forest. Every discovery, a new carving, a hidden shrine, a collapsed wall, was a revelation. It was as if the earth itself was slowly giving back the memory of a lost civilization. Throughout the 20th century, Angkor became a symbol of Cambodia itself. Angkor Wat was placed on the national flag. It became a source of pride, a reminder that long before the modern world, the Khmer had built something eternal. Visitors from across the globe came to marvel at its towers, its carvings, its quiet grandeur. Even in times of turmoil, when Cambodia suffered war and hardship, Angkor endured. The temples bore witness, silent but steadfast, to both suffering and resilience. And then, in 1992, Angkor was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This recognition brought new energy to preservation. Teams of experts worked to stabilise collapsing walls, to clear invasive roots, to study the inscriptions that spoke of kings long gone. Yet the goal was never to erase the marks of time entirely. The jungle, after all, was part of Angkor's story. Tourists came not only to see stone temples, but to see how nature had embraced them, how roots coiled around doorways, how trees rose through courtyards, how light filtered through leaves onto carvings of dancers and gods. Angkor was a dialogue between stone and forest, man and nature, past and present. Today, millions walk its causeways each year. They come at dawn to watch the sun rise over Angkor Wat, its reflection shimmering in the moat. They wander through the bayon, meeting the gaze of its smiling faces. They stand in Ta Prohm, where massive silk cotton trees spread their roots over walls, creating one of the most iconic images of Angkor's embrace by the jungle. For many, the experience is dreamlike, as if stepping into another world, a world where history is alive, where the past breathes through every stone. Yet for the Khmer people, Angkor is not only a site of tourism or study, it is part of their soul. The temples are places of worship, of pilgrimage, of national identity. They connect the present to the ancestors who once built and walked among them. In their shadow, rituals are still performed, incense still burns, prayers still rise. The empire may have fallen, but the spirit of Angkor endures. Close your eyes now and imagine standing in Angkor today. The air is warm, filled with the scent of incense and the sound of chanting. Around you, tourists speak in many languages, but beneath their voices, you hear something older, the murmur of leaves, the cry of birds, the silence of stone. The faces of the bayans still smile, as they have for centuries. The towers of Angkor Wat still rise golden in the light of dawn, and the jungle still whispers, its roots and vines a reminder that time flows ever onward. Angkor's legacy is vast. It tells us of the heights human beings can reach, of cities that mirror the cosmos, of kings who sought eternity. It also reminds us of impermanence, that even the greatest works are vulnerable to time, to nature, to the slow erosion of water and wind. Yet in its survival, in its rediscovery, Angkor offers something more, a lesson in resilience. Though empires fall, memory endures. Though cities fade, stones remain. And though the jungle took over, it could not silence the story. So as night deepens around you, let your mind rest on Angkor's stones. Picture the towers against the stars, the roots winding like rivers over walls, the reflection of temples in still water. Let the story of this forgotten empire, once abandoned and then found again, guide you gently into rest. For Angkor is not only history, it is a dream carved in stone, a dream carried through centuries of silence, a dream that still whispers beneath the jungle canopy, waiting for you to listen. And so we come to the end of our journey through Angkor, a city of gods and kings, of water and stone, of splendour and silence. We have walked its causeways when they were alive with pilgrims and merchants, and we have wandered its ruins when only the jungle remained. We have seen towers rise in glory, and we have watched them fall into shadow. What Angkor leaves us is more than history. It is a reminder that all things change. Empires rise and fall. Monsoons bring abundance and then drought. Forests retreat before the hand of man, only to return when man lets go. And yet even in this cycle of impermanence, there is beauty. The stones endure, the carvings whisper, the faces still smile. As you rest now, let your mind drift among those silent stones. Imagine the cool shade of the galleries, the sound of water lapping against ancient moats, the rustle of leaves high above. Picture the moonlight glinting off the towers of Angkor Wat, the stars mirrored in the reservoirs, the jungle breathing softly around it all. Angkor's story is not just about kings or battles. It is about time itself, how it flows, how it changes us, how it carries us forward. Tonight, let it carry you gently into sleep. Let the weight of the day fall away as the jungle falls quiet at night. And as you close your eyes, remember, the empire may be gone, but its dream remains. A dream of water, stone and silence. A dream of Angkor, still standing, still waiting beneath the stars. Sleep well, sleep peacefully. Let the whispers of history guide you into rest. Thank you for listening. I wish you a peaceful, restful night, and I look forward to seeing you again on our next journey through history.